At the commencement of the Muslim conquest of Egypt, Egypt was part of the Byzantine, Eastern Roman Empire, which had its capital at Constantinople. Egypt had been conquered just a decade before by the Persian Empire under Khosrau II. However, Emperor Heraclius recaptured it after a series of campaigns against the Sassanid Persians, only to lose it to the Muslim Rashidun army 10 years later. Before the Muslim conquest of Egypt had begun, the Byzantines had already lost the Levant and its Arab ally, the Ghassanid kingdom, to the Muslims. All of this left the Byzantine Empire dangerously exposed and vulnerable. Rashidun invasion of Egypt. Rashidun army crossing the Egyptian border in December 639, Amr ibn al-As left for Egypt with a force of 4,000 troops. Most of the soldiers belonged to the Arab tribe of Ak, although Al-Kindi mentions that 1/3 of the soldiers belonged to the Arab tribe of Gafik. The Arab soldiers were also joined by some Roman and Persian converts to Islam. However, Umar, the Muslim caliph, reconsidered his orders to Amr, thinking it foolhardy to expect to conquer such a large country as Egypt with a mere 4,000 soldiers. Accordingly, he wrote a letter to Amr commanding him to come back. The messenger, Uqba ibn Amr, caught up with Amr at Rafah, a little short of the Egyptian frontier. Guessing what might be in the letter, Amr ordered the army to quicken its pace. Turning to Uqba, Amr said that he would receive the caliph's letter from him when the army had halted after the day's journey. Uqba, being unaware of the contents of the letter, agreed and marched along with the army. The army halted for the night at Shadratin, a little valley near the city of El-Arish, which Amr knew to be beyond the Egyptian border. Amr then received and read Umar's letter and went on to consult his companions as to the course of action to be adopted. The unanimous view was that as they had received the letter on Egyptian soil, they had permission to proceed. When Umar received the reply, he decided to watch further developments and started concentrating fresh forces at Medina that could be dispatched to Egypt as reinforcements. On Eid al-Adha, the Muslim army marched from Shadratin to El-Arish, a small town lacking a garrison. The town put up no resistance, and the citizens offered allegiance on the usual terms. The Muslim soldiers celebrated the Eid festival there. Conquest of Pelusium of El-Bais in the later part of December 639 or in early January 640, the Muslim army reached Pelusium, an Eastern Roman garrison city that was considered Egypt's eastern gate at the time. The Muslim siege of the town dragged on for 2 months. In February 640, an assault group led by a prominent field commander Huzaifa ibn Wala successfully assaulted and captured the fort and city. Armanusa, the daughter of Cyrus who fiercely resisted the Muslims in Pelusium and fell hostage in their hands, was sent to her father in the Babylon fortress. The losses incurred by the Arab Muslim army were ameliorated by the number of Sinai Bedouins who, taking the initiative, had joined them in conquering Egypt. These Bedouins belonged to the tribes of Rashida and lacked the ease with which Pelusium fell to the Muslim Arabs, and the lack of Byzantine reinforcements to aid the city during the month-long siege is often attributed to the treachery of the Egyptian governor, Cyrus, who was also the Melkite Patriarch of Alexandria. After the fall of Pelusium, the Muslims marched to El-Bais, 40 miles from Memphis via desert roads and besieged it. El-Bais was the first place in Egypt where the Byzantines showed some measure of resistance towards the Arab invaders. 2 Christian monks accompanied by Cyrus of Alexandria and the famous Roman general Attribution came out to negotiate with Amr ibn al-As. Attribution was previously the Byzantine governor of Jerusalem, and had fled to Egypt when the city fell to the Muslims. Amr gave them 3 options: to either convert to Islam, to pay jizya, or to fight the Muslims. They requested 3 days to reflect, then, as mentioned by al-Tabari, requested 2 extra days. At the end of the 5 days, the 2 monks and the general decided to reject Islam and jizya and fight the Muslims. They thus disobeyed their ruler, Cyrus of Alexandria, who wanted to surrender and pay jizya. Cyrus subsequently left for the Babylon fortress, while the two monks and Attribution decided to fight the Arabs. The fight resulted in the victory of the latter and the death of Attribution. Amr ibn al-As subsequently attempted to convince the native Egyptians to aid the Arabs and surrender the city, based on the kinship between Egyptians and Arabs via Hagar. When the Egyptians refused, the siege of Bilbais was continued until the city fell after a month. Towards the end of March 640, the city surrendered to the Muslims. With the fall of Bilbais, the Arabs were only one day away from the head of the Delta siege of Babylon. Amr had visualized that the conquest of Egypt would be a walkover. This expectation turned out to be wrong. Even at the outposts of Pelusium and Bilbais, the Muslims had met stiff resistance. The siege of Pelusium had lasted for 2 months and that of Bilbais for 1 month. Both battles were preludes to the siege of Babylon, which was a larger and more important city. Here, resistance on a larger scale was expected. After the fall of Bilbais, the Muslims advanced to Babylon, near modern Cairo. The Muslims arrived at Babylon sometime in May 640 AD. Babylon was a fortified city, and the Romans had prepared it for a siege. Outside the city, a ditch had been dug, and a large force was positioned in the area between the ditch and the city walls. The Muslims besieged the fort of Babylon sometime in May 640. The fort was a massive structure 60 feet high with walls more than 6 feet thick and studded with numerous towers and bastions. A Muslim force of some 4,000 men unsuccessfully attacked the Roman positions. Early Muslim sources place the strength of the Byzantine force in Babylon about 6 times the strength of the Muslim force. For the next 2 months, fighting remained inconclusive, with the Byzantines having the upper hand by repulsing every Muslim assault. Sometime in May 640 AD, Amr sent a detachment to raid the city of Fayum. The Byzantines had anticipated this and had therefore strongly guarded the roads leading to the city. They had also fortified their garrison in the nearby town of Lahun. When the Muslim Arabs realized that Fayum was too strong for them to invade, they headed towards the western desert, where they looted all the cattle and animals they could. They subsequently headed to Oxyrhynchus, which was defeated. The Arabs then returned to Lower Egypt down the river Nile. Reinforcements from Medina. In July, Amr wrote to Umar requesting reinforcement, but before the letter reached him, the Caliph had already dispatched the first reinforcement, which was 4,000 strong. The army was composed mostly of the veterans of the Syrian campaigns. Even with these reinforcements, Amr was unsuccessful. By August 640, Umar had assembled another 4,000-strong force, which consisted of 4 columns, each of 1,000 elite men. Zubair ibn al-Amawam, a renowned warrior and commander, veteran of the Battle of Yarmouk and once a part of Khalid ibn Walid's elite mobile guard, was appointed the supreme commander of army. Umar had indeed offered Zubair the chief command and governorship of Egypt, but Zubair had declined. The column commanders included Miqdad ibn al-Aswad, Ubaidah ibn as-Samit, and Qarir ibn Huzaifa. These reinforcements arrived at Babylon sometime in September 640. The total strength of the Muslim force now rose to 12,000, quite a modest strength to resume the offensive. Battle of Heliopolis. 10 miles from Babylon was Heliopolis. The Muslim army reached Heliopolis in July 640. It was the city of the Sun Temple of the Pharaohs and was famous for its grandiose monuments and learning institutions. There was the danger that forces from Heliopolis could attack the Muslims from the flank while they were engaged with the Roman army at Babylon. With some detachments, Amr and Zubair marched to Heliopolis. There was a cavalry clash near the current neighborhood of Abazaya. The engagement was not decisive, although it resulted in the occupation of the fortress located between the current neighborhoods of Abdon and Azbakia. The defeated Byzantine soldiers retreated to either the Babylon fortress or the fortress of Nikiu. At an unguarded point of the wall of Heliopolis, Zubair and some of his picked soldiers scaled the wall of the city, and after overpowering the guards, opened the gates for the main Muslim army to enter the city. Heliopolis was thus captured by the Muslims. Amr and Zubair returned to Babylon, conquering of Fayum Babylon. When news of the Muslims' victory at Heliopolis reached Fayum, its Byzantine garrison under the command of Domitianus evacuated the city during the night and fled to Abuat. From Abuat, they fled down the Nile to Nikiu without informing the people of Fayum and Abuat that they were abandoning their cities to the enemy. When news of this reached Amr, he ordered a body of his troops to cross the Nile and invade Fayum and Abuat. The Muslim soldiers captured the entire province of Fayum without any resistance from the Byzantines. The Byzantine garrison at Babylon had grown bolder than ever before and had begun to sally forth across the ditch, though with little success. There had been a stalemate between the Muslim and Byzantine forces at Babylon, until the Muslim commanders devised an ingenious strategy and inflicted heavy casualties on the Byzantine forces by encircling them from three sides. During one of their sallies, the Byzantines were able to retreat back to the fort, but were left too weak for any further offensive action. This situation forced the Byzantines to negotiate with the Muslims. The Byzantine general Theodorus shifted his headquarters to the Isle of Rauda, while Cyrus of Alexandria, popularly known as Makakis in Muslim history, entered into negotiations with the Muslims, which failed to give any productive results. Emissaries were also exchanged between Theodorus and Amr, leading to Amr meeting Theodorus in person. After fruitless negotiations, the Muslims acted on the 20th of December, when, in a night assault, a company of hand-picked warriors led by Zubair managed to scale the wall, kill the guards and open the gates for the Muslim army to enter. The city of Babylon was captured by the Muslims on the 21st of December 640, using tactics similar to those used by Khalid ibn Walid at Damascus. However, Theodorus and his army managed to slip away to the island of Rauda during the night. Surrender of the Bade. On the 22nd of December, Cyrus of Alexandria entered into a treaty with the Muslims. By the treaty, Muslim sovereignty over the whole of Egypt, and effectively on their Bade, was recognized, and the Egyptians agreed to pay jizya at the rate of 2 dinars per male adult. The treaty was subject to the approval of the Emperor Heraclius, but Cyrus stipulated that even if the emperor repudiated the treaty, he and the Copts of whom he was the high priest would honor its terms, recognize the supremacy of the Muslims and pay them jizya. Cyrus submitted a report to Heraclius and asked for his approval to the terms of the treaty. He also offered reasons in justification of the acceptance of the terms of the treaty. Amr submitted a detailed report to Umar and asked for his further instructions. When Umar received this report, he wrote back to say that he approved of the terms provided Heraclius agreed to submit to them. He desired that as soon as the reactions of Heraclius were known, he should be informed so that further necessary instructions could be issued promptly. Heraclius's reaction to Cyrus's report was violent. He removed him from the viceroyship of Egypt, but he remained the head of the Coptic Church. This was a matter in which the emperor could not interfere. Heraclius sent strict orders to the commander-in-chief of the Byzantine forces in Egypt that the Muslims should be driven out from Egypt. Cyrus waited on Amr and told him that Heraclius had repudiated the Treaty of Babylon. He assured Amr that so far as the Copts were concerned, the terms of the treaty would be followed. Amr reported these developments to Umar. Umar desired that, before the Byzantines could gather further strength, the Muslims should strike at them and drive them from Alexandria. It is recorded that Cyrus requested 3 favors from the Muslims, namely, Do not break your treaty with the Copts. If the Byzantines after this repudiation ask for peace, do not make peace with them, but treat them as captives and slaves, and, when I am dead, allow me to be buried in the Church of St. John at Alexandria. This position was to the advantage of the Muslims, as the Copts were the natives of the land of Egypt and both the Byzantines and the Muslims were strangers. Though some Copts from personal considerations continued to support the Byzantines, the sympathies of the Copts were now, by and large, with the Muslims. The Copts were not supposed to fight against the Byzantines on behalf of the Muslims, but they undertook to help the Muslims in the promotion of war effort and in the provision of stores, build roads and bridges for them, and provide them moral support. March to Alexandria. The Byzantine commanders knew that the next target of the Muslims would be Alexandria. They accordingly prepared for the expected siege of the city. Their strategy was to keep the Muslims away from Alexandria by destroying their power through continued sallies and attacks from the fort. Even if this did not keep them away, it would weaken them morally and physically. It would be more of a war of patience than strength. In February 641, Amrah set off for Alexandria from Babylon with his army. All along the road from Babylon to Alexandria, the Byzantines had left regiments to delay, and if possible, inflict losses on the advancing Muslims. On the third day of their march from Babylon, the Muslims' advance guard encountered a Byzantine detachment at Tarnut on the west bank of the Nile. The Byzantines failed to inflict heavy losses, but they were able to delay the advance by one more day. The Muslim commanders decided to halt the main army at Tarnut and send the advance guard cavalry forward to clear the way from the possible Byzantine detachments. This was done so that the main army could reach Alexandria as soon as possible without being delayed by Byzantine regiments midway. 20 miles from Tarnut, the Byzantine detachment that had withdrawn from Tarnut the day before joined the detachment already present at Sharik to form a strong offensive force. They attacked and routed the Muslim advance guard. The next day, before the Byzantines could resume their offensive to annihilate the Muslim advance guard completely, the main Muslim army arrived, prompting the Byzantines to withdraw. At this point, the Muslim commanders decided not to send forward the advance guard, so the whole army marched forward, beginning the following day. The Muslims reached Sultish where they encountered a Byzantine detachment. Hard fighting followed, but the Byzantine resistance soon broke down and they withdrew to Alexandria. The Muslims halted at Sultish for a day. Alexandria was still 2 days' march from Sultish. After 1 day's march, the Muslim forces arrived at Kirayun, 12 miles from Alexandria. Here the Muslim advance to Alexandria was blocked by a Byzantine detachment about 20,000 strong. The strategy of the Byzantines was that either the Muslims would be driven away before they actually arrived at Alexandria, or that they would be as weak as possible if they did. The two armies were deployed and fighting followed, but action remained indecisive. This state of affairs persisted for 10 days. On the 10th day, the Muslims launched a vigorous assault. The Byzantines were defeated and they retreated to Alexandria. The way to Alexandria was now cleared, and the Muslim forces resumed the march from Kirayun and reached the outskirts of Alexandria in March 641 AD. Conquest of Alexandria and fall of Egypt. The Muslims laid siege to Alexandria in March 641 AD. The city was heavily fortified. There were walls within walls, and forts within forts. There was no dearth of provisions and food supply in the city. The city also had direct access to the sea, and through the sea route help from Constantinople in the form of men and supplies could come at any time. As Amrah surveyed the military situation, he felt that Alexandria would be a hard nut to crack. The Byzantines had high stakes in Alexandria, and they were determined to offer stiff resistance to the Muslims. They mounted catapults on the walls of the city, and these engines pounded the Muslims with boulders. This caused considerable damage to the Muslims, and Amr ordered his men back from the advanced position so that they might be beyond the range of the missiles. A seesaw war followed. When the Muslims tried to go close to the city, they were hit with missiles. When the Byzantines sallied from the fort, they were invariably beaten back by the Muslims. It is said that Heraclius, the Byzantine emperor, collected a large army at Constantinople. He intended to march at the head of these reinforcements personally to Alexandria, but before he could finalize the arrangements, he died. The troops mustered at Constantinople dispersed, and consequently no help came to Alexandria. This further demoralized the Byzantines. The siege dragged on for 6 months, and in Medina, Umar got impatient. In a letter addressed to Amr, the caliph expressed his concern at the inordinate delay in the invasion of Egypt. He further instructed that the new field commander would be Ubaidah, and he would launch an assault on the fort of Alexandria. Ubaidah's assault was successful, and Alexandria was captured by the Muslims in September 641. Thousands of Byzantine soldiers were killed or taken captive, while others managed to flee to Constantinople on ships that had been anchored in the port. Some wealthy traders also left. On behalf of the Egyptians, Cyrus of Alexandria sued for peace, and his request was granted. After the invasion of Egypt, Amr is reported to have written to Caliph Umar. The permanent loss of Egypt meant a loss of a huge amount of Byzantium's food and money. The loss of Egypt and Syria, followed later by the invasion of the Exarchate of Africa, also meant that the Mediterranean, long referred to as the Roman Lake, was now contested between two powers, the Muslim Caliphate and the Byzantine Empire. In these events, the Byzantine Empire, although sorely tested, would be able to hold on to Anatolia, while the mighty walls of Constantinople would save it during two great Arab sieges from the fate of the Persian Empire. An attempt was made in the year 645 to regain Alexandria for the Byzantine Empire, but it was retaken by Amr in 646. In 654 an invasion fleet sent by Constans II was repulsed. From that time no serious effort was made by the Byzantines to regain possession of the country.